So now it's my pleasure to introduce our distinguished speaker for this evening, Dr. Ian Mcintosh. Dr. Mcintosh is an Australian anthropologist and peace scholar and founder of the Sacred Journeys Project that brings pilgrimage and religious tourism scholars together from across the globe for an annual conference. He's edited 3 volumes on pilgrimage and peace building, and most recently, he authored the book, Pilgrimage, Walking to Peace, Walking for a Change. You can find Pilgrimage on sale at Amazon, and either paperback or digital download version. Dr. Mcintosh has also written 3 books on Australian Aboriginal religion and culture, including The Whale and the Cross, a biography of Yolngu elder David Burumara, easy for me to say. His 2017 documentary film, Waves of Fortune, which we previewed for those of you who signed on a little early this evening, is about China and the Maritime Silk Road and won an Emmy Award for WFYI public television station. Dr. Mcintosh, I now turn this program over to you to lead us on this pilgrimage. You need to unmute.
Thank you, Larry, and it's great to see so many of my friends and colleagues from around the world and across the country. When Larry asked me to speak on pilgrimage and international relations, I had to put my thinking cap on. Diplomacy is not what automatically comes to mind when the topic of pilgrimage arises. But now, in hindsight, I think it should. So let me share my screen so I can explain myself. The distinguished scholar of pilgrimage, the founder of William and Mary's Institute for Pilgrimage Studies, George Grenier, who's in the audience tonight, has declared that pilgrimages are by far the most peaceful mass rituals that humankind has yet devised for itself. Think of the 100 million pilgrims who attended the last Commune pilgrimage in pre-pandemic India. The organizers had to build the largest tent city in the world just to house them. However, most definitions of pilgrimage don't address these higher level functions, and they obscure significant impacts beyond individual interests. What does it mean, for example, for a nation when such a vast number of people is purified of sin? Standard definitions say that pilgrimage is about performing atonement, seeking blessings, or giving thanks at a place of deep religious significance, far removed from the mundane routines of everyday life. Popular pilgrimages, like the Camino de Santiago, tend to be synonymous with personal freedom, the freedom to be, to become, to grow, to broaden one's horizons in the company of fellow seekers or believers, and to discover oneself and one's true place in the world. So what has this seemingly profound personal quest, centered on feelings of awe and wonder, have to do with diplomacy and international relations? In this presentation, I'm going to look beyond the much emphasized personal quest for spiritual blessings, self-reckoning, or healing, to pilgrimage's role in international diplomacy. At the domestic level, there are many examples of pilgrimage that focus on human rights and justice. Think of the annual reenactment of MLK's Selma to Montgomery Freedom March, or the annual pilgrimage to Manzanar and other Japanese internment camps. In California and Nevada. But I'm going to focus on international diplomacy with illustrations from across the globe. Given that my major case study deals with China's Uyghur Muslim population, shown here, I will give particular emphasis to the Hajj and Umrah, the pilgrimages to Mecca. Here's a photo of Xinjiang to familiarize yourself, there in pink in the far west of China. One might say that the Uyghur situation in China is a domestic issue, but you need to realize that this minority, like the Tibetans, or the Hawaiians for that matter, consider themselves to be a sovereign people. In this presentation, I'll also explore the idea of the Pilgrim Paradox and the potential of pilgrimage to be an avenue for peace building in troubled areas of the world like Xinjiang, the homeland of the Uyghur. Now, much recent research, including a book by Ian Reader called Pilgrimage in the Marketplace, has helped situate sacred journeys not just in local economies, think of hostels, hospitals, restaurants, and souvenir stalls, but in the global economy. The annual economic impact of the 500 million pilgrimages in search of higher things is in the billions of dollars. Even in days of old, pilgrimages often followed well-worn trade routes, and those routes were an avenue not just for the passage of goods and services, but also for ideas and fashions, both world news and world views. World-heeled pilgrims traveling to Mecca, Jerusalem, or even Canterbury were often targeted by robbers or bandits and faced considerable personal risk. That's why the storytelling pilgrims of Chaucer's day traveled in convoy. And if they survived, they would regale their fellow parishioners with astonishing tales about the people they met, the places they visited, the good, the bad, and the ugly. As a forerunner to today's tourism, pilgrimage played a role in both promoting the faith and opening minds. Think of the famous quote by Mark Twain when he says, "Travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness, and many of our people need it sorely on these accounts. Broad, wholesome, and charitable views cannot be acquired by vegetating in one little corner of the earth all one's lifetime. You have to get out there." As I described in my WFYI documentary, Waves of Fortune, the journeys of pilgrims can have a profound impact on the countries traversed. For example, consider the Silk Road from China to the Middle East, which passed through such major Buddhist pilgrimage sites like Dunhuang and Darchai. While luxury goods like silk, tea, and porcelain were being exported west, Buddhist and Manichaean Christian missionaries were heading east along the very same path, and imams traveled by sea, establishing centers of learning and pilgrimage in places like Quanzhou that survive to this day. Here's a picture of the Muslim cleric and pilgrim extraordinaire, a rival of Marco Polo for his adventures, Ibn Battuta. Think also of Saint Francis of Assisi during the disastrous Fifth Crusade to Egypt, where, defying the resolve of crusaders who considered themselves pilgrims, and against all odds, he met with the Sultan and his Sufi advisors and brokered a short-lived peace that saved many lives. Francis also brought back to Assisi various new ideas and practices, like the Muslim call to prayer, which impressed him deeply. Pilgrims to Assisi today can see some of the Sultan's gifts and reflect on the timeless prospect of peace that Francis so desired. So our failure to see this broader significance of pilgrimage is largely a problem of definitions that elevate the individual quest above all else. Most definitions go like this. What is a pilgrimage? The journey of a pilgrim. And what is a pilgrim? One who goes on pilgrimage. So there you have it. All your questions are answered. But levity aside, pilgrimage is said to be a journey to a shrine or sacred place for religious or spiritual motives. While very popular, this narrowly construed characterization is misleading because it only tells half the story. In my mind, it leaves out all the best bits, the dialectical bits, the world in us and us in the world. And it prevents us from appreciating the broader significance of this universal phenomenon. One sort of definition that I do like comes from Will Parsons of the British Pilgrimage Trust, who describes the pilgrim as the singer of a song, with the letters song standing for self, other, nature, and God, or goodness. And I really like this characterization. But again, there's much more to discover in this ancient practice. Let me give you an example of pilgrimage's other dimensions. So some years back, I was visiting a Muslim village in eastern Indonesia. A great feast was underway in the community as the community was preparing to send out a good number of its people, both young and old, on the pilgrimage to Mecca. They had not yet adorned the two pieces of white cloth, that universal signifier of human equality and unity before God, but instead wore colorful t-shirts identifying them as being from this particular Indonesian island. It was a joyous occasion, with much singing, dancing, and uplifting speeches. Yes, this was a pilgrimage that each individual would undertake for themselves to the best of their ability. And if their journey was accepted by God, then their sins would be forgiven and great blessings would be bestowed upon them and their community. As one of the 5 pillars of Islam, the pilgrimage to Mecca is not just about how the individual might grow in a spiritual sense from this perhaps once in a lifetime experience. Rather, it was also about how these pilgrims, on their return, would help this community and the country flourish in ways both spiritual and material, finite and infinite. The two interactive dimensions, the individual and the group, cannot be separated. We don't exist in a vacuum. As John Donne famously said, no man is an island entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. Specifically, we are all members of a culture that gives meaning and purpose to our lives. In this sense, the sacred journey can never just be about the self. It is also about what we bring back to the collective that has the power of transformation. As many pilgrims will tell you, the real pilgrimage begins when you return and put into practice what you've learned. The inverse is also true. A colleague of mine who leads pilgrimage healing walks says that in helping others along the sacred path, she heals herself. And it has always been this way. Let me give you a few more examples of the influence of the group on the individual. For Saudi authorities, as in India, the logistics of servicing the needs of millions of pilgrims is an enormous undertaking. And while the opportunity for cross-cultural interactions might be limited, the mere act of witnessing the unparalleled gathering of humankind is in itself transformative. Pilgrims to Mecca will see Malaysians and Indonesians, Indians and Pakistanis, Bosnians and Albanians, West and East Africans, and so on, all the colors of the rainbow as they circle the Kaaba and pray on Mount Arafat. Recall Malcolm X's remarkable journey to Saudi Arabia in 1964 and the epiphany that led to a complete revision of his worldview. For the first time, he could see beyond race. There were many ways of being a Muslim in the world, just as there were many ways of being a Christian, a Jew, or Buddhist. And he was able to envision the unity of humankind and our shared destiny through faith. So that's the challenge that I set you in preparation for our Uyghur case study. I want you to think about the broader significance of pilgrimage, especially those that you yourself have undertaken. Pull yourself back a little and take a wider view. For starters, let's consider the Camino de Santiago. And I know many of you watching have been on the Camino. This is one of the great pilgrimages of Christendom and one of the most popular long-distance walking journeys of a religious nature in the world. Since medieval times, the road to Santiago to the tomb of St. James the Elder has attracted pilgrims from across Europe. And this map shows the many recognized pathways. What is the larger dimension? The world in us. The Camino, as it's called, or the way, is well known for the camaraderie and spirit of hospitality it engenders among walkers. People who might ordinarily not have anything to do with one another are thrown together in this inspirational ritual. In the literature, scholars call this disruption of the normal structure of things by the term communitas. On the trail, all are equal, giving impetus to visions of a new world order without divisions of an artificial sort. But there's another dimension to the Camino that we also need to consider. Of course, we can go back to medieval times. The Camino was center stage in the reconquest of Spain from the Moors. In the present day, however, the Camino has been critical in the political project of the European Union and its drive to create cultural coherence in a multicultural, multinational continent. In 1987, the Council of Europe declared the Camino de Santiago as the first European cultural itinerary. This distinction, which currently recognizes a total of 32 routes, has encouraged the recovery and development of the Camino as an example of Europeanism. In the hotel where I stayed in Santiago, the rooms were named after the founding fathers of the EU. I was in one named for Jean Monnet, the French entrepreneur who was a great advocate for European unity. So while we are walking the Camino for our own personal reasons, or you might even be walking for others, or just out enjoying nature, we should not be blind to the larger agendas at play. Pilgrimages like this are a product of a community's aspiration for itself through the design and actions of its members who are upholding or defending certain truths or values deemed important to them. We are embedded in these church, state, and continental projects which have their own history and trajectory, of which we are undoubtedly playing a part. Now, there are many other examples I could share, but in the remainder of my time, I want to focus on the idea of pilgrimage diplomacy. The major case study that I'm leading up to, as I said, will be from China's Xinjiang Province. I want to address the genocide complaint raised by the Muslim Uyghur minority against China that was rejected by the International Criminal Court back in December. There's plenty of evidence to support the claim of human rights abuses and cultural destruction. Presently, upwards of 10% of the Uyghur people, around 1 million, along with other ethnic groups, including Kazakhs and Uzbeks, are living behind bars in supposed re-education camps that look like this. But the charge of genocide was rejected because China, like the US, is not a signatory to the Hague-based ICC. So I asked the question, given that cultural displays by the Uyghur, including all forms of pilgrimage, are currently banned by the communist authorities, how can China's long-term desire for peace and relations of mutual benefit be realized in the absence of sacred journeys, given that the profound meaning that these have for the people? Before I delve further into the situation of the Uyghur, let me first set the stage with a series of other case studies that help show the role of pilgrimage diplomacy as it might apply in Western China. When it comes to pilgrimage and peace building, the ascent of Sripada, or Adam's Peak in Sri Lanka, has few rivals. In fact, there's nothing like this place on earth. Look at the pilgrims going up the hill there. There's two ways up, one on this side of the mountain and one on the other side, and you have to come back the same way. And when it's packed like that, you can just imagine how difficult it is to move, in fact. But it's a remarkable place. Up until the 1940s and independence from Great Britain, Sripada, which means the sacred footprint, was the greatest interfaith pilgrimage site on earth, attracting Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists, and others in considerable number. For at least 1,000 years, pilgrims had climbed this mountain during the pilgrimage season in order to worship at an indentation in the rock that Hindus saw as the mark of Shiva, Buddhists as the footprint of the Buddha, Sufis as the imprint of Adam's foot after he was expelled from paradise, and Portuguese Catholics, not to be left out, as the mark of St. Thomas, apostle to the world, and so on. Every faith had their own version of the story, making this a sacred site par excellence. For the indigenous peoples of the area, the mountain itself was a sentient being, and from its peak, they worshipped the sun together. Sri Lanka's deadly civil war ended only in 2009, and today, as before, pilgrims walk together in an overnight trek to the top. In many cases, they perform the same rituals, but there is no attempt to convert others or to prevent them from worshipping in their own manner. Pilgrimage here is an example of what is called track 2 diplomacy, occurring informally in civil society, rather than the track 1 form dominated by government authorities. Sri Lankans are justifiably proud of their legacy of interfaith cooperation, for there are just a handful of places in the world where this happens with any frequency, like Ethiopia, Lebanon, and India. Turkey has Rumi's tomb and museum, though it has been a secular site for over 100 years. Even while the great Sufi poet is part of the national persona or national consciousness, with his legacy impacting the lives of millions of Turks and others, prayer is outlawed and pilgrimage is outlawed. But that doesn't stop seekers of all descriptions coming to pay their respects to the teacher, who is the author of such classics as In Baghdad, Dreaming of Cairo, In Cairo, Dreaming of Baghdad. In this poem, following a dream, the hero embarks on a long journey in search of his fortune, but comes to a powerful realization that pilgrimage itself was unnecessary. And I quote, "The water of life is here. I'm drinking it, but I had to come this long way to know it." In the majority of cases, however, pilgrimage around the world is restricted to members of a single faith and its many sub-branches. But these mass rituals often attract pilgrims from multiple countries and cultures. Consider the annual pilgrimage to Lourdes in France, the site of a Virgin Mary apparition in the mid-19th century that attracts upwards of 5 million pilgrims a year from across the Catholic world. And it was online, the pilgrimage this year, because of COVID. But Lourdes is also the venue of the annual International Military Pilgrimage. This pilgrimage began in 1944 for French and German soldiers to physically and spiritually heal together. But since then, it has expanded considerably. This pilgrimage now brings together soldiers from 42 countries, including many former adversaries, to pray together for world peace, healing, and justice. There's nowhere like Lourdes. As a pilgrimage scholar colleague of mine from Malta, who accompanies the afflicted each year, likes to say, spiritually, I am always at Lourdes. Changing gears a little, there is a conference on pilgrimage diplomacy planned for Commune in Iran later this week. It is obviously a topic of pressing international significance, as 45 papers in Persian, Arabic, English, and Urdu have been submitted for presentation. I can anticipate that the agenda will include some of the following topics. Firstly, the pilgrimage to Mecca and its importance for international relations and conflict resolution. Pre-pandemic, over 3 million pilgrims were arriving in Mecca each year on the Hajj as a demonstration of Muslim solidarity and submission to God. This represents a substantial increase from just 100 years ago, when approximately 50,000 of the faithful would make the journey. Quotas limit the number of pilgrims. Indonesia is the largest with 221,000 spots, followed by India and Pakistan with 200,000 each, right down to Brunei with 1,000 and Singapore 900 and so on, a number based on population. In this pilgrimage, Saudi relations with other Islamic countries come sharply into focus, and the pilgrimage serves as a platform for communication across the religious and political divide. In 2016, for example, Iran barred its pilgrims from traveling to Mecca after accusing Saudi Arabia of failing to guarantee the safety of its citizens living there. A second possible topic for the conference will be relations between Iran and Iraq. The former Iraqi leader, Saddam Hussein, was a Sunni Muslim, and he suppressed the performance of the Arba'in and Ashura pilgrimage at Kaaba, now the world's second largest annual pilgrimage. This pilgrimage has a very significant role in uniting Iran and Iraq and all the other countries with significant Shia populations, like Afghanistan, Yemen, Lebanon, and Bahrain. Unlike the pilgrimage to Mecca, This sacred journey is open to members of multiple faiths, like the Yazidi, the Zoroastrians, and the Vatican always sends a representative. As a background, this pilgrimage marks the anniversary of the martyrdom of Imam Hussein, grandson of the Prophet, by his rivals at the Battle of Karbala in 680 of the Common Era. The Imam and his 72 companions took on the 16,000 soldiers of the Yazid Caliph, marking the schism that exists between Sunni and Shiite branches of Islam. Another example of pilgrimage diplomacy that might be addressed at the conference is the 4.7-kilometer corridor established between India and Pakistan to allow the visa-free passage of Indian Sikh pilgrims to one of their holiest sites, the Gurdwara Darbar Sahib in Pakistan, which has been out of bounds since the partition of India in 1947. Since 1974, Indian Sikhs and Hindu pilgrims have been able to attend certain religious festivals in Pakistan under the bilateral agreement protocol on visits to religious shrines, but this particular corridor was only actualized in 2020. Interestingly, the corridor is located nearby the place where there is the daily lowering of the flag ceremony and a military practice by the security forces of both India and Pakistan that has been carried out since 1959. The drill features rapid dance maneuvers and the raising of the legs as high as possible. It is symbolic of the two countries' rivalry and is marked by high tension, though some argue that it also promotes the brotherhood and cooperation of the nations. It's a major tourist attraction. If we go back in history, one of the most famous case studies of pilgrimage diplomacy is a relationship between India and China, forged by both Indian and Chinese monks beginning in the early years of the Common Era. Famous personalities like Bodhidharma, who introduced Zen and Kung Fu to the Shaolin monks. Then there was Xuanzang, who undertook an epic 19-year pilgrimage from Xi'an in central China to bring back the scriptures and holy relics. For those of you who have been to Xi'an, the Wild Goose Pagoda was built to house these relics and sacred texts, becoming a major pilgrimage site for Buddhists in East Asia. Despite recent tensions in the Himalayan region, such journeys along the Silk Road helped in establishing a long-term and peaceful engagement between India and China that has few parallels on the world stage. The exploits of pilgrims like Xuanzang and others who came before him are taught in Indian primary schools as a core topic of the curriculum. I now want to get to the heart of my Western China case study. To do so, I will introduce the concept of the Pilgrim Paradox. In a highly original piece of research, economist David Clinging-Smith demonstrated the almost counterintuitive impacts of the Hajj on Pakistani pilgrims. He compared the viewpoints of successful and unsuccessful applicants in the lottery used by Pakistan to allocate visas to Mecca. Far more people want to go than can be accommodated. It was anticipated that as a result of the pilgrimage to Mecca, that pilgrims would display an increased adherence to global Islamic practices, such as prayer and fasting, and a decreasing participation in localized practices. And this was the case. It was also anticipated that this increased in-group behavior might be accompanied by antipathy towards non-Muslims, but this was not the case. To his surprise, participation in the Hajj actually increased belief in equality and harmony among ethnic groups and Islamic sects. Attitudes towards women in both education and employment also improved. Additionally, pilgrims showed an increased belief in the idea of peace and of equality and harmony with adherents of other religions. This is what he found. The definition of the Pilgrim Paradox, increased in-group behavior at the axis mundi, the center of the universe, in this case Mecca, leads not to antagonism towards members of other faiths, but to increased empathy. A second study from Russia's Circassian region, you can see it here it's bounded by the red line, where Muslims faced oppression from Russian state authorities, confirmed these findings. The pilgrims to Mecca from Circassia achieved a sense of peace with themselves, with other Muslims, with non-Muslims, and with the environment. To reach this conclusion, the social scientists compared the views of Circassian pilgrims to Mecca with those who wished to undertake the pilgrimage. Specifically, they found that upon their return, pilgrims were more open-minded, had a greater tolerance of outsiders, and were less combative concerning the state than their brothers and sisters still awaiting the opportunity to go to Saudi Arabia. Russian authorities, like their Chinese communist counterparts, are fearful of the rise of Islamic fundamentalism, and they assume that participation in the Hajj will intensify religious emotions and in-group solidarity, and that this will translate into divided loyalties and separatist activities. The Pilgrim Paradox, however, suggests that this is not the case. And if these research findings can be verified, then perhaps China should be promoting the Hajj for the Uyghur as an avenue for nation building. So let's look at the situation in China in a bit more detail. China is a battleground state with regard to minority and indigenous rights. With the rise of the communist state in the 20th century, there have been unceasing efforts at suppressing Uyghur religious and cultural activities, including pilgrimage to shrines like this. The September 11th, 2001 terrorist attacks provided China with the opportunity to link its campaign of oppression of the Uyghur, like Tibet, to the worldwide war on terrorism. This crackdown has led to the shutting down of mosques and the arrest of indigenous Uyghurs believed to have connections with an alleged separatist movement. The situation for Uyghur is intolerable, especially for those wishing to undertake any sort of pilgrimage, especially to Mecca. Imagine if you had to ask government authorities for approval to participate in such a ritual. Imagine if the approval process required that you pledge allegiance to a leader who does not represent or respect your interests. Imagine that you also had to repudiate the pilgrimage's sacred values and declare your atheism before approval was even considered. Then imagine a world in which very few receive such approval, and then only after months, if not years, of vetting. Finally, imagine that you had the green light for pilgrimage travel and are given a GPS tracking device to place around your neck that monitors your every movement. Sound bizarre? Well, this is a reality for Muslims in China, especially those who want to participate in the Hajj. As I said earlier, for many, pilgrimage is synonymous with freedom. What we see in China for the Uyghur is the very antithesis of that freedom and flies in the face of the 2007 United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples that affirms the Uyghurs' collective and individual rights to culture, environment, health, education, and economic and social development. Often, the full measure of an unfolding catastrophe only becomes real when we can place a name and a face on that suffering. For me, it came with the disappearance in 2017 of the pilgrimage and folklore scholar Raheel Dawood from Xinjiang University. She had been on the way from Urumqi to a conference in Beijing when it was presumed she was imprisoned in one of the 28 detention centers that have been created for the re-education, de-radicalization, and de-Islamization of the Muslim population. Here is a picture of Raheel during her fieldwork with Uyghur elders, and a picture of one of her books, Living Shrines of Uyghur China. About 15 years ago, Raheel had been a visiting scholar at Indiana University, Bloomington, where I learned of her work. Agencies like Scholars at Risk and the Scholars Rescue Network have been trying to secure her release or any information at all on her whereabouts, and there's been no luck as yet. Last year, she was given the Courage to Think Award in absentia by Scholars at Risk. And there is a major international campaign for information on her situation. What is it about Uyghur folklore and pilgrimage that is so problematic for the Chinese? One gets a sense of the profound ideological divide when the Chinese refer to these detention camps as vocational training centers. Those Uyghurs who have escaped to neighboring countries say that the centers are in place to wipe out Uyghur identity. For example, any public displays of membership in the Muslim faith are denounced and punished, including the wearing of a beard, which is a symbol of piety for Uyghur. When Uyghur elders called for a ban on the consumption of alcohol, they too were interned in the camps. Here's a list of some of what are called the 48 suspicious activities that can land you in the camps. This is just one of the pages. Some of the suspicious activities: going to a mosque, praying is a suspicious activity, wearing a scarf in the presence of the Chinese flag, speaking to someone overseas, knowing someone who has traveled abroad, and this impacted our IUPUI Uyghur students who have all left, and we doubt if they're going to be coming back soon. Telling others not to swear or sin, and so on. Owning a tent, you can see there. It's quite an astonishing list, and it goes on. Behind bars, the Uyghurs must study communist propaganda, chant slogans honoring the Communist Party, and denounce their unique cultural identity and faith. This is one of the definitions of genocide, explaining the recent announcement by the US government to that effect. The Chinese say that these camps are humane and that inmates are happier for the experience, which can last months or even years, depending on the nature of the charges against specific individuals. China's goal in Xinjiang is to achieve social stability, sound economic growth, and harmonious coexistence. But this current methodology is bound to fail. New and inclusive approaches are therefore required to promote cohabitation. So why not look at the Pilgrim Paradox for possible alternative approaches to forced assimilation? China needs to think outside of the box if it is to achieve its desired goals of stability and growth. Now, when I first went to China in 1977, all sites of pilgrimage were shuttered. Religion was the opium of the people, and the Communist Party enforced a policy of militant atheism. There were political pilgrimages to famous communes like Darchai, and I went on that pilgrimage, which is described as a Mecca of collectivist agriculture and a shrine to China's communist ideals. But it was not until the reform period in the early 1980s that new laws allowed for a degree of religious freedom for prescribed religions, which include Buddhism, Taoism, Confucianism, Islam, and Christianity, both Protestantism and Catholicism, as well as folk religions. Minarets and church spires, though, cannot be higher than the Chinese mast and flag, and quite a few houses of worship have been demolished in recent years. And international religious alliances and foreign influence is frowned upon, especially with the US Pentecostal churches and the Wahhabis of Saudi Arabia. Nevertheless, pilgrimage in China is flourishing today, absolutely flourishing, and sites of old are being visited by vast numbers of Chinese tourists, some for spiritual motives, and others just out of curiosity, wanting to experience the unique art, architecture, and history of the place. Chairlifts now adorn the mountain peaks that lone Taoist and Buddhist hermits used to reside. And the ecological footprint of having millions of tourists and pilgrims, religious tourists, visiting these often delicate places is becoming a major concern. In such an environment, might it be possible to extend these same privileges to the Uyghur for their traditional pilgrimage practices and allow them the freedom to pursue the most significant journey of their lives to Mecca? As I've shown, when we look back over the many ways that pilgrimage can contribute to community development, facilitating sacred journeys, both locally and internationally, might just be the only way forward. So before I wrap up, I want to underline a point that I made earlier. While the common perception of pilgrimage is of a personal endeavor centered on individual interests, there is far more to this phenomenon than meets the eye. This was my intent when writing the book, Pilgrimage, Walking to Peace, Walking for Change, which I have to say is available for $3 on Kindle, a bargain at half the price. So that's me on the cover, by the way, on the Camino de Santiago. Many of you will recognize that. That's Padron, where St. James the Elder is said to have given his first sermon on Spanish soil to a mystified and rancorous crowd. James was speaking on the topic of unconditional love and forgiveness. Imagine that. My sister, who was walking with me and who took this photograph, prayed here and left a small offering in memory of our mother and father who had passed away a few years earlier. It is such a wonderful place. We were the only ones there, and the atmosphere was one of quiet contemplation. The view from the top stretches for miles, and as I sat there, I forgot about the blisters on my feet and the long slog ahead of me in the final push into Santiago. The enormous historical, cultural, and religious significance of this whole town was not lost on me, and it inspired a feeling approaching elation. And in that fleeting moment, I thought about James's timeless message of love and forgiveness. There really was a possibility of a better tomorrow for our world. We just had to find the way. And for me, this is what pilgrimage is all about, finding the way. So we should go to questions.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Mcintosh. That was really wonderful and really appreciate it. It's fantastic. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our co-host for this evening and the moderator for our question and answer session, Mr. Cenk Kandemir. Mr. Kandemir is a member of our board of directors and is quite familiar with the concept of pilgrimage and particularly the Hajj. He oversees the Indiana offices of the Niagara Foundation, which strives to promote social cohesion by fostering civic conversations and sustained relationships between people of different cultures and faiths. Now, there are two ways to ask questions. At the bottom of your screen, there should be several icons, one of which says chat right at the bottom in the middle. If you click on this, you'll be able to either type in a question to the moderator to ask the question, so that Dr. Kandemir can ask the question, or let him know that you have a question to ask yourself, and then he'll call on you. So if you go to the chat below, there's an opportunity. If you click on it, it says that the default is that you're sending a message to everyone. You really want to send it to Cenk Kandemir, C-E-N-K, K-A-N-D-E-M-I-R. If you just click on where it says everyone, you'll see a list of people and find Mr. Kandemir's name. Then your message will go right to him and everyone won't see the messages coming across their screen and disrupting them. Now, when you're recognized, you should unmute yourself, and after you've finished, please mute yourself again. So, Mr. Kandemir, would you please take over from here and moderate our question and answer session?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Larry. You'll be able to, send directly to me. So, as the questions come by, I'll be able to, look at the chat box over here, and then, find your question, and then, ask it to Dr. Mcintosh. But before I start, I would like to, open up with like a couple of questions. The first question, Dr. Mcintosh, I want to ask you is like, what makes you get interested in studying the pilgrimage? I mean, how did you get involved in these studies? Could you please, let us know?
Yes, well, a very good question. Thank you, Cenk. Well, of course, my field of study is anthropology, and that's all about the search for universal truths of the human condition. And of course, I think pilgrimage is one of those universal truths. But I should go before that, go back a bit earlier than that, of course. And I should say that despite the reference to my sister praying in Padron, we don't come from a religious background. Far from it. My father used to say that he was an agnostic, but he was just being polite. I like to, I usually tell a range of stories about, explaining my interest in pilgrimage and how I came to this point in my journey. A funny thing happened on the way to the forum, as they say. Often I'll say that, one summer when visiting friends in Vancouver, I was walking by a bus stop near the University of British Columbia when I spotted two large boxes of books with a sign on top saying, "Take me." And the book on top was that book by Ellen Badone and Sharon Roseman, Intersecting Journeys, the Anthropology of Pilgrimage and Tourism. And I thought, well, that looks pretty interesting. And it had a big photograph of the cathedral in Santiago, and I've always remembered that. But of course, seriously, the most significant influence on me was my many years that I spent in Aboriginal Australia, working in schools and in health centres and land councils, and exploring the rich spiritual life of the people. You know, the dreaming, the song lines, the walkabout, terms I'm sure you've all heard about, and all of that. One of the most formative events in my late teens was my pilgrimage to the Chinese Commune of Darchai that I mentioned in the talk, which at the tail end of the Cultural Revolution in 1977. This visit made a deep impression on me, and in fact, I dedicate the first chapter. Well, the first chapter of the book is about that political pilgrimage in the times of militant atheism. Similarly influential on me was a 3-year online project that I did with Gaza University students in Palestine on pilgrimage and peace building. And that's also in the book there. Another shameless plug for the book, Larry. But probably the first time that I really saw pilgrims up close was when I lived in Armenia and witnessed the daily rituals of Armenians as they honored their holy mountain, Mount Ararat, you know, of Noah's Ark fame. And I started to talk to them about the mountain and what it meant to them. So those are the big ones, I think, how I came to pilgrimage studies.
Well, thank you so much. Another question related to that. I mean, you talk about like many different pilgrimage practices. I want to ask you, what are the impacts of these pilgrimage practices to the communities in different countries? What kind of changes did you observe while what kind of effects did you observe in this like research and studies?
Yeah, thank you, Chek. Well, yeah, there's so much that we can say there. Of course, one of the main points of my presentation regarding diplomacy, for example, is that we can only appreciate the full complexity of pilgrimage when we start to view it not just as something that individuals do, but as a group activity. You know, as I said, pilgrimages are the product of a community's aspiration for itself through the design and actions of its members who are, upholding and defending certain truths or values deemed important to them. And when these truths and values are held in common by groups in different parts of the world, they provide an avenue for communication that might not otherwise be available. This is where pilgrimage diplomacy comes into play. But there's many other areas that we can talk about. And of course, your question touches on the important issue of definitions. My colleague, George Greenier, who, as I said, who's on the call, greetings, George, defines pilgrimage in terms of its transformative potential for individuals. And I think that is very appropriate. Travel for transformation. When one is a tourist, there isn't always that expectation or hope of transformation, perhaps just a suntan, though there are many examples of the categories of tourist and pilgrim overlapping. But to your point about impacts, just recently I reviewed a paper for a journal about the impact of the Hajj on pilgrims. Already I've spoken about the Pilgrim Paradox for the pilgrims to Mecca that I have interviewed myself. The answers are often similar to what the researchers found. As I mentioned, there is peace with oneself, peace with other Muslims, peace with non-Muslims, and peace with the environment. The paper that I reviewed looked at how long before the magic wore off. You know, we've all been on pilgrimage. How long before the magic wore off? How long before the magic of the Hajj wore off? And of course, the answer of the researcher was about 3 months. Of course, we try to stay in the moment for as long as possible. And of course, for pilgrims, there might be an expectation or hope of transformation that is lifelong. But unfortunately, that's not always the way that human beings work. And I'm sure the pilgrims tuned in here, and there's plenty of them, are already thinking about their next sacred journey. Another angle, Cenk, and like I said, there's many, but I'll just give you one more angle when we talk about impacts. The Commune, for example. One colleague from Norway is studying the healing dimension of long-distance communal walking. And it's very interesting. Called green pilgrimage therapy, pilgrimage is prescribed by psychologists in certain instances as an alternative to expensive medicines that might have negative side effects. And our evidence is compelling. And of course, the many benefits of walking in nature are well known to us all. As St. Augustine said in a very famous quote that we pilgrim scholars like to share, it is solved by walking. Yes. Even the philosopher Nietzsche and Kierkegaard and whoever else you might like to say attributed all of his best ideas to walking. Indeed, some people say that we think with our feet just as much as with our heads. Anyway, that's just two examples, Cenk.
Thank you so much. I have like several questions lined up in here. I'll start with the question of Claire. She said, you mentioned the number of slots for each country of the Hajj, and that the Vatican even sends a representative. What's the quota for Americans?
The Vatican doesn't send a representative on the Hajj. The Vatican sends a representative to the Kaaba, the pilgrimage in Iraq, which is for the Shia Muslims. Sunni Muslims go too, of course, but not on the Hajj. The American quota, look, it changes every year, and I've got a feeling it's in the 20,000 mark, but I can't tell you exactly.
Yeah, as far as I remember too. I mean, for example, in Turkey, I mean, it's really hard. I mean, sometimes you sign up and you have to wait. There will be like a lottery, and 1 year, maybe 2 years, and 3 years. So if the Muslim population is like a lot, I mean, you don't have much chance. But in America, I believe that there's no quota, because there's like a very minority of Muslims, maybe like 5-6 million and so on, compared to the number of people living in the United States. So many people are very easily going to Hajj every year. That's what I experienced.
Yes, that's true. So it's based on the Muslim population in relation to the total population of the country.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's still a number. But I don't think you have any problem coming from the US.
Yes.
Mecca.
Another question asking about, can you speak to political parties within nation states trying to co-opt pilgrimage for their partisan goals?
Oh, yes. Well, of course, the most, given that I've been speaking so much about the Camino, I mean, that's one of the great examples, isn't it, with Franco's Spain. That was very much the case, where the co-option of the Camino for his fascist purposes. But there's many others, and it's quite controversial too. It's even pilgrimages like Medjugorje in the Balkans is also driving certain Croatian political agendas. Yeah, so it's there's quite a lot written on that topic, and it's a good one.
Another question: what are some of the ancient pilgrimages did the settlers coming to Plymouth think of themselves as pilgrims? And another one is like, why was this name attached to them?
Well, yes, the Pilgrims, absolutely. They were seeking their religious freedom in the US, and the Pilgrims, followed by the Puritans, and of course, they saw themselves as pilgrims in the New World. But this is one, the controversy surrounding the Pilgrims, and so I'm an advocate for Indigenous rights, and when I lived in Boston, I was down there at Plymouth every Thanksgiving protesting, against the Pilgrims and the Puritans and all the lot. So, you won't get very much of a good view of them from this mouth.
Right. Thank you. Another question, it's asking, is there a way to elevate the practice of other mass rituals such that the benefits associated with pilgrimage can be realized in this secular or social context?
How do we promote pilgrimage, you're saying?
A way to elevate the practice of mass rituals such that the benefits associated with the pilgrimage can be realized in the secular.
It's good, and of course, there's many people on this call who would probably answer this a lot better than me. But pre-pandemic, my colleagues in religious tourism have told me that pilgrimage and religious tourism was the fastest growing segment of the tourism industry. So the church attendance, especially in places like Europe, might be going down, but the numbers of pilgrims are going up. I mean, the numbers are really astonishing, and you can't just put it down to approved transportation, although that's a big one. I mean, we just have to look at well, the world population has grown so at such an incredible rate over the last 50 years, but pilgrimage numbers are really exploding, and I expect them to continue to do that. In the US, of course, there's many pilgrimages that perhaps we're not so much aware of that we should be advertising a lot more. There's the famous ones in walking pilgrimage in New Mexico to Chimayo, and there's major pilgrimages in New York. Of course, the great pilgrimage to the Mormon pilgrimage to Salt Lake City, of course, is a wonderful one. But I consider pilgrimages to Gettysburg to be just as significant as those. I mean, this is to me, Gettysburg is a sacred site. I mean, when you go to that place and you see the way that Abraham Lincoln is presented and presents his proclamations, this is as shrine-like as it gets. So there's many pilgrimages here. Even in our own state, of course, in Indiana, we have there's pilgrimages following major historical events like the Trail of Death of the Potawatomi Indians. But there's other pilgrimages, that we can call. It depends on what your intention is, of course. But over the summer, we visited. Well, it was my wife's idea that we would go to Gary. Now, those in Indiana will know why someone would go to Gary. Why would you go to Gary? That's the childhood home of Michael Jackson, and where the Jackson 5 was formed. And for people who are big fans of Michael Jackson, sure, I'm one of them. But for others, this person is more than that. And you go to the house; it's not open. It's a tiny little house, and you just can't imagine that such great things came from this tiny little box in this sort of the setting. This is in a, well, you have to see the area. It's a very depressing part of the state. But and you can write a little message, and people do. And one of the common messages that I saw, and for the people, and of course, an anthropologist, I go there, I ask every other person that's there, I want to know what they're thinking. And that's in the nature of the anthropological project. And of course, the common message that I was getting from people is that, I asked them, are you a pilgrim? Of course they're pilgrims. Why would you come over here? Look at this horrible place. It's a horrible place, yes, but it's also a sacred place. And and the message that I took away from, and I actually thought at the time that it was a nice definition of pilgrimage. And as one person said to me, it's not where you come from, it's where you're going. And I thought that's just wonderful. Isn't that right? When you're going on a pilgrimage, I mean, you've come from somewhere, but you're going somewhere else, somewhere better.
Well, there are many questions coming up. This one is about the economic effect. It says that the larger pilgrimages bestow large economic benefits to the pilgrimage site. Do you see the locals viewing them moneymakers, or do they gain any inspiration from the pilgrims? Is there any resentment to the trunks that come?
Again, that's a great topic. I've heard a lot of presentations on that. A lot of these major pilgrimage sites, you'd be a little bit shocked at the commercial dimension of these places. I mean, what's coming to mind is Lourdes comes to mind, you know, and you can, the trinkets, my goodness, you street after street of trinket sales. I mean, of which, you know, oh, look, I can't even describe how vulgar a lot of these trinkets are. I mean, you know, the toilet rolls that sing Ave Maria, and you know, all sorts of things. I mean, it's bizarre, the sort of thing. But I've seen this at pilgrimage sites all over the world. I mean, as I said, Ian Reader writes about this, and I've seen it at the major Shinto shrine of all Japan. It's called Ise, an absolutely amazing place, you know, where the entire buildings and the entire shrine is completely torn down and renewed it's either 10 or 20 years, I can't remember now, and nothing will be left except one little stone they leave on the ground. It's a spiritual site, you know, of great magnitude. But of course, you take one step outside the sacred precinct, and there's all the commercial stuff. It's just, you know, and people say this detracts, but it's always been this way. People want a souvenir, you know, they want to take back something from that place, and you know, but the commercialism is also can be a major boon for communities. I mean, that's the idea behind this pilgrimage called the Abraham Path in the Palestinian West Bank. It was started by a famous conflict resolution scholar, William Ury, who started the School of the Harvard School of Mediation. You know, his books, Getting to Yes, Getting Past No, and so on. When he was put on the spot and said, all right, you've written these great books, what about the Middle East conflict? What are you going to do about that? So what did he do? He created a pilgrimage. Mm-hmm. Imagine that. He created a pilgrimage. You know, and initially it was to be a peace pilgrimage. But after 10 years or more, the major impact has been on community development, economic development of these quite impoverished Palestinian towns and villages that the pilgrims walked through, following the pathway of Abraham. So yeah, it's the economic part. It's central.
This question is from another viewpoint. It's asking, what is the pilgrimage called if the traveler does not believe in the religious hocus pocus involved in the usual inspiration for taking the time and making the effort to go and make such a substantial effort, maybe like a walk in the forest?
You'll have to say that again. The hocus pocus lost me there. Sorry. So one more time.
It's asking, like, what is the pilgrimage called if the traveler does not believe in the religious hocus pocus involved? So instead of that, you know, in the usual inspiration, you know, taking the time and going there and making all those efforts. I mean, just why don't we, you know, go and walk in the forest? Yeah.
Oh, well, look, you know, I think, you know, again, we can, my Camino friends will say it better than me, but, you know, I'm guessing that, you know, it could be up to a third or more of the pilgrims walking the Camino aren't doing it for religious purposes. They're there for the history, the culture, nature, you know, the camaraderie, you know, all of those things. And, you know, not necessarily the religious dimension at all. But, you know, people have, you know, they bring different things to the trail, and it depends what they want to get out of that. I mean, you know, there's a nice song that an Australian singer called Dan Mullins, and he's a big Camino fan. He's written a song called I think it's called Somewhere Along the Way being a reference to the Camino. But the song is about, the main words of the song are, you know, I hope you find what you're looking for out on the way. And of course, the Camino is as good a place as any for you to find what it is that you're looking for. And, you know, a lot of pilgrimages are like that, helping you to find or to clarify. I mean, you know, it's probably the case with all of the major pilgrimages that not everybody has got the same motives. You know, there's a wonderful quote by, I'm forgetting her first name, Karen Armstrong. And she said that, you know, when people you know, have their heads bowed in prayer, they're not, even in the same house of worship, whether it's the mosque, the church, the synagogue, whatever it is, they're not worshiping the same God, which I thought was an extraordinary thing. She said, no, for some, the God is a tiny thing like this, that they only think about once in a blue moon, or for others, they're thinking about God much more regularly, and it's larger, right up to some people where God fills their entire field of vision. So, and that's the case in the houses of worship. Yeah, they're on their iPhones, I'm sure, and it's the same in the pilgrimage. It's got everybody is there, whether they're on the Hajj or they're going to the Kaaba or whatever. But you've got the full range of people and personalities.
Yes, yeah, it changes. Yes, there's I see over here. One of our guests says that I made the Hajj many years ago, and was when I saw the Kaaba, it has a lasting effect on me, and but I think it comes from a feeling that feeling the divine presence. She's saying like living accordingly and being aware of the divine presence. And she's adding also like perhaps the effect lasts more than 3 months for those who make the effort to go on that pilgrimage.
Yes,
we all agree with that.
It's true. It's true. Look, for some people, it is. It's a lifelong transformative experience. For some, I think like I said, the person who wrote the article, that was, they went to, and I can't remember where the setting was, but they interviewed, everyone that's been in the Hajj over the last X number of years, and that was the average. 3 months before the magic wore off.
Yes,
what can one say?
I see that change too. I mean, as a Hajj, like one of the 5 pillars of Islam and so on, people, sometimes wait for like a lifetime, maybe 20, 30 years, 50 years, just for that change and so on. I mean, and after that, they don't want to lose that. I mean, whatever happens,
Yes.
There are many questions coming up. Another one with the political parties. How has the relationship changed between government control versus religious rules of various pilgrimages? It seems that internationally we may all get along better than locally.
Yeah. Well, it's difficult to answer the question because it's so varied. The situation. I mean, a country like the Republic of Ireland, which is one of the great pilgrimage destinations on earth. I recommend to everyone, you go to Ireland and go straight out there. There's no end to the fun that you can have on those incredibly moving pilgrimages, whether that's St. Patrick and so on. But in case of Ireland, they want to try and replicate the success of the Camino for Spain. I mean, that's inspired such extraordinary development. And so many countries want to replicate this, and Ireland being one of them. They're revitalizing ancient pathways, well, not just there, over in Scotland as well. And but yeah, so the attitude of governments, it's quite different, in so many different settings.
Yes, I understand. A question from Dino. I see if he wants to ask directly. I don't know if you'll be able to unmute yourself, you'll be able to ask your question. Otherwise, I'll be able to, read it out to Dr. Mcintosh. Dino?
Oh, okay. Can you hear me okay? Hi, Dr. Mcintosh. Thank you so much for your lecture. Very informative. I wanted to ask you a little bit about track 2 diplomacy. You mentioned that pilgrimage is track 2 diplomacy, right? And I'm thinking maybe pilgrimage sites, because they're often directly managed by governing authorities, would it be maybe better to see it as track 1.5, where government officials mix with non-officials to create dialogue in their favor, particularly viewing it from soft power? So I just wanted to get your thoughts on this and kind of see what you think. Thank you, Dr. Kandamar.
Yes. Well, thanks for that question. Yes, look, I agree with you entirely that, and in fact, in the Sri Lanka example that you raised there, there have been numerous attempts at, well, it's largely supported by civil society, but you know, that mountain is such a symbol for interfaith cooperation. You know, when Sri Lanka became independent, there was a major push to have the mountain represented on the flag because of the unity of Tamils, Buddhists, Buddhist and Muslims. But that gave way, and of course now you see the Sinhalese Buddhist lion, and then the colors for the Muslims and the Tamils. But so there has been a lot of background efforts to try and promote this with the 1.5, of course. But it's yeah, it's quite a difficult, difficult issue. But I do see that mountain as playing an ongoing role, you know, because people are so proud of it. You know, it's not really on the tourist agenda. It's you know, it's quite a difficult climb up there, and you know, and of course, you know, I went in the middle of the pilgrimage season, you know, sort of December to March, when we're talking millions of people, and you know, unfortunately, I chose the night of the Chinese New Year, which was a weekend, and you know, coming into that site, there was 29 kilometers of parked buses on either side of the road, 29 kilometers. And I thought, this is not good. I'm not going to get up this mountain. But, you know, and, you know, and of course you can't tell who's who on the mountain, unless it's a Buddhist monk. But otherwise, the Muslims, the Christians, the Hindus, the Buddhists are walking in their, you know, in their groups. They're all singing the same songs as they come up the mountain. See, this is what I'm talking about, the track too. I mean, and there's this etiquette on the mountain of feeding others, helping others, you know, no matter what their religious group. And you get to the top, and there's the same rituals that they all must do, the ringing of the bell, and you know, and so on and so forth. But yes, you know, getting having the government get behind this extraordinary symbol of you know, interfaith solidarity. That's something that I think should be a priority. And a lot of people think the same in Sri Lanka. You know, they're very proud of it.
Well, thank you. Another question. Do you think like pilgrimage can help in some ways to address global warming? Any idea about pilgrimage in Africa? So that was the question.
Oh, all right. Two questions there. Global warming, of course, of course. You know, well, in fact, you know, you know, I mentioned at the end there the ecological, environmental footprint of you know, having millions upon millions of pilgrims, especially in China, well, everywhere. You know, going to these very delicate ecosystems. You know, this was the reason for the development of what's called the Green Pilgrimage Network. It started in India. You know, you look at the Ganges River, you know, and it's, you know, the Ganges, where I showed the picture where, you know, tens of millions of people will submerge themselves as part of that ritual. And this is a very polluted river, the Yamuna, the Ganges, all of those rivers are polluted. And because of that, the Green Pilgrimage movement started, and it's the guiding principles of that, you know, are transformative in themselves, because it's asking you to conform to certain behaviors before you leave, you know, and of course, and when you're there, and as you perform the rite. So, well, yes, absolutely, and of course, there's a growing awareness of the need to manage, you know, these pilgrimages in a much more responsible manner. Pilgrimages in Africa, oh, that's a whole lecture in itself. My goodness, you know, and it's a great topic, and I'm very keen on studying more about pilgrimage. I actually brought to IUPUI some years back a sheikh from Touba in Senegal. So Touba is the pilgrimage center for Sufis in West Africa, from Guinea and Mali, Senegal, all of those countries. There's a very high Sufi population, and they go to this mosque in Touba. This is where the Murid Brotherhood was formed. This attracts, again, the same number of people who go on the Hajj will go to Touba in eastern Senegal. And it has its origins in the colonial era with when the leader of the Murid Brotherhood, the Sufi Sheikh Amadou Bamba, was exiled to Gabon by the French authorities. And when I was shopping in Walmart a couple of weeks back, and I saw the name tag on the guy behind the register, and I thought, oh, that's West African, and I could hear him talking to someone else, and I heard it was a fresh French accent, and I thought, all right, and I often do this, in places, it might be taxi drivers or whoever. I'll go straight to the pilgrimage topic, and you win a friend immediately, I'm telling you. So I just said, Amadou Bamba, Sheikh Amadou Bamba. And of course, he was in raptures, and I was too, and he was part of the Brotherhood. And, we agreed to meet. We haven't done so yet, but, he's been here for some years. And Amadou Bamba is a prophet, and so that pilgrimage is a wonderful thing. And the Sheikh who delivers the great announcements each year, I brought him to Indianapolis, so I don't know, it must be 10 years ago now, and he gave various talks. And, because at that time we had a very strong West African student population. So I did it, for them, for myself, of course. But no, it's good. There's so many pilgrimages that you can talk about in Africa. I mean, think of Ethiopia. Oh, my goodness. I mean, this sites like Lalibela. I know you know Lalibela. The name might not mean something to it, but I know you know it. These are those rock-cut underground churches. The most famous one in the shape of a cross. Wonderful place. This was built as a New Jerusalem at a time when people could not travel to Jerusalem, and it's a remarkable place. And of course, further north from Lalibela, you have Aksum. Again, I know you'll recognize the pictures if I had it here, but this is where the Ark of the Covenant is said to be held. And of course, this is a huge pilgrimage site for all of that, all the Christian peoples of that part of Africa and beyond. And there's so more. There's so many in Africa that we could talk about. I mean, Mount Kenya, for the Kikuyu and other peoples, who walk around that in great prayer rituals for peace and so on. In Tanzania, it goes on and on. In South Africa, so many.
Yeah, Adebola, mentions about Ghana. West Africa has a sort of pilgrimage, the Elmina Kessel, yeah. In Ghana. Yeah,
Ghana has major pilgrimages. In fact, I was watching a documentary not too long ago that featured a major pilgrimage, and the central feature of that was the equality of men and women. I was very taken by that because it had a focus that I haven't seen in many other rituals of that sort. I mean, we're talking hundreds of thousands of people in Ghana will go on this pilgrimage, and the name escapes me for the moment. But yes, the underlying equality of men and women, something else.
Okay. Well, thank you, Dr. Mcintosh. Well, I'll take a final question in here from Michael. He said, you talk about the individual experience. I never thought about my experiences over 10 years of living, working with, and even living with the Mayan people in the central and northern highlands of Guatemala as a pilgrimage. And he added, but given that it changed my experience of life, the world, and spiritualism, so was it that? I mean, It was never intended, but does that count?
Well, if you wanted to count, of course, I have no doubt that, I mean, there's places in Aboriginal Australia, if I close my eyes, I'm there, I'm at that place. The most stunning places, the places where I was privileged to see and to work with and to experience, just remarkable things that, that were life-changing in so many ways. And, I haven't been back to some of the one that I see when I close my eyes, I haven't been back to, and I would love to go back there, and reacquaint myself with the people of that particular place, and to think about who I was when I was there. You know, so it depends on how you approach this. You know, I did want to, you know, this individual thing, of course. You know, we can't downplay that. Of course, the significance of individual pilgrimages, and you know, and I wanted to mention something that I read yesterday, and so I have this daily Facebook post, a daily Facebook, you know, it's a Facebook site called Sacred Journeys. And every day I put up something. I find something to put up there about pilgrimage. I get press releases sent to me from all over the place on anything to do with pilgrimage anywhere, you know, and if it's moderately interesting, I'll put it up there. Well, yesterday there was something that was extraordinary for when we think of individual pilgrimages, pilgrimages where you write the script. You know, in most of these other cases, someone else has written the script for their purposes. And of course, you're performing, you're enacting the script. And of course, you're bringing, you know, your own interpretation to the script. And in this way, the pilgrimage is, you know, changing you, and you're also changing the pilgrimage. You know, so the scripts are a big deal in pilgrimage. You know, who's written them and why, and so on. But in this case that I put up on my Facebook site, and Larry is going to send this around, this link to the site. This was of a 50-something-year-old Japanese man who, for the last 33 years of his life, has dedicated himself to visiting the grave sites of every famous person who had some sort of significant impact on him. 33 years non-stop. And he's managed to pay for this through telling stories or giving talks. So he does it full time. He now takes his family with him. But he started 33 years ago. He came from a very unhappy family, and you know, he comforted himself as a young Japanese guy reading the works of Dostoevsky. You know, so 33 years ago, he went to St. Petersburg, Leningrad, and to the grave of Dostoevsky and thanked him. The full bow onto the ground, thanking Dostoevsky for what he had done for him. And then it continued. So he's now visited something like 2,500. Well, he said he gave up counting at 2,500. So he's so the next person, the grave he visited, let me think, was Beethoven, because Beethoven, he'd had broken relationships, and Beethoven had as well. And when he listened to Beethoven's music, that comforted him, and he was able to negotiate this the sadnesses in his life by thinking about Beethoven. So he goes to Beethoven's grave, and again, the full bow. And the list is astonishing. You know, he, one of my famous, favorite Chinese writers is Lu Xun. He was one of the inspirations for Mao Zedong and many of the communists for his very, very sort of inspiring, very sad sort of stories about, you know, one's purpose in life. And, you know, he'd suffered, you know, persecution by the Japanese, you know, in the early years of the 1900s. Well, of course, you know, our friend from Japan knew about Lu Xun, knew about his struggles, was empowered by the story of Lu Xun, and that was the next one. He went to Lu Xun. And so he's 33 years worth. I mean, Charlie Chaplin made him laugh. He went to Charlie Chaplin's grave in Switzerland. You know, and on and on and on and on. I was absolutely blown away by this. This is a pilgrim, you know, unlike any that I've come across, and, you know, and I was very inspired by that. And you know, I've got to find his website, and you know, and maybe reach out to him and have a chat, you know, as a fellow pilgrim. But yeah, so the script, you know, it's he's written his own script there. Well, most of us we follow someone else's script. We bring ourselves to the performance. You know, like I said that. In that song, I mean, the use of the word song, you know, the performative aspect, pilgrimages, the performing of a song. It's a very nice characterization. But yeah, script or no script, it can all be very meaningful to you. So thank you, Michael.
Well,
Okay.
well,
I think you've been. Yeah.
I'll leave the word to, you know, Larry. Well, thank you so much. There are some other, you know, comments over here and so on. You know, I'm sure you don't have time to, you know, read those. But the thing is, thank you so much, Dr. Mcintosh, for your, insightful comments. I'll leave the word to Larry.
Well, thank you, Cenk, and thank you, Dr. McIntosh. I think your inspiration has carried over and inspired us. So I want to thank you for sharing your evening with us and your insights on pilgrimage and its diplomatic potential for improved international relations, something you might not have thought about when you thought about going on pilgrimage. I hope everyone will have a chance to experience a pilgrimage in their lifetime, and I hope we'll emerge from this pandemic soon so that we can go sooner rather than later. Now, next Tuesday, we're going to return to our winter weekly Great Decisions series with the focus on global supply chains and their impact on U.S. national security. This program will feature Dr. Charles Dhanaraj, professor and chair of the management department at Daniels College of Business at the University of Denver. Now, to get an excellent introduction with various perspectives on each of the 8 Great Decision topics in the series, we strongly encourage you to purchase the Great Decisions briefing book. Though it's not required to participate in the programs, you'll find it provides a wealth of information as well as maps, charts, graphs, photographs, additional suggested readings, and so forth on each of the timely world affairs topics. You can find more information on all of our programs in the Great Decisions book on our Indiana Council on World Affairs website at indianaworld.org. And finally, we have another very interesting distinguished speaker program coming up next month. On Wednesday, March 17th, we've scheduled an outstanding panel to discuss another topic that brings people together, sports, with a program focused on diplomacy through sports and the globalization of sport and societal change, which should be timely, coming on the eve of a tip-off of the NCAA men's basketball tournament here in Indianapolis. The panel will include someone from the U.S. Department of State, the NCAA, the new CEO of the Indy 11 soccer team, and retired German-American basketball star and former Indiana Pacers fan favorite, Detlef Schrempf. So, Dr. McIntosh, would you like to say a final farewell?
Yes. Well, we didn't have time to say that if you're in Indianapolis, think about the Indianapolis Spiritual Trail. And we've got David Cook here from the Hoosiers on the Camino, who's a regular down there. This was a trail created for everyone because we believe that every city should have a trail for contemplative walking in nature, communal walks in particular, on themes that unite us all. So I'll also make sure that I send you the link to we have a Facebook post for the Indianapolis Spiritual Trail as well. So I'll make sure
we'll send around something hopefully tomorrow with a little summary of what's going on tonight and the links that Dr. McIntosh has talked about this evening. We'll send it to everyone who signed up for this program. And then it'll be available on our website as well as the video of this presentation is going to be available on our website. So if someone wants to see this, you want to share it with someone, or you want to watch it again, came in late, you'll be able to see it. So for now, on behalf of the Indiana Council on World Affairs, we thank you. We wish you a good evening, and we hope to see you all again sometime very soon. Thanks and good night.